Just 24 hours before Marilyn Monroe's death, she wrote something in her secret diary that would shake Hollywood to its core. Those 7 words she scribbled down, they're questioning everything we thought we knew about how she really died. But here's the most shocking part. The name she wrote in that final entry. I'll reveal that name at the 18-minute mark, but first you need to understand what happened during those last precious hours. Because the raw vulnerability every woman can relate to, it's bleeding through every page of that diary. August 4, 1962. In her Brentwood home, Marilyn Monroe picked up her favorite pink pen and opened to the last page of her diary. The first sentence she wrote was this: "I'm tired of wearing masks. But here's what you don't know yet, that diary wasn't just for her, she was writing it for someone else. Someone specific. Curious who? Hold that thought, because every single word in this story is going to reveal the real Marilyn you never knew existed." That morning at 9:30 a.m., her housekeeper Eunice Murray found Marilyn writing in her bedroom. "Writing this early isn't like me," Marilyn said, quickly closing what she'd been working on. But Eunice caught a glimpse of something that would haunt her for decades. 3 words at the top of the page that made her blood run cold. What were those words? Don't skip ahead, because the clues were there all along. You see, most people think they know Marilyn Monroe. The blonde bombshell, the sex symbol, the tragic Hollywood icon who died too young. But what if I told you that everything you've been told about her final day is missing the most crucial piece? What if her death wasn't what it seemed? What if those diary pages, hidden for 62 years, contain the truth that powerful people never wanted you to discover? Pause for a second and think about this. Have you ever felt so alone that you wrote your deepest secrets just hoping someone somewhere would understand? That's exactly where Marilyn's story begins on August 4, 19. It's about to change everything you thought you knew. Let me paint you a picture. It's a Saturday morning in Brentwood. The California sun is streaming through the windows of 12, but inside that house, Hollywood's biggest star is sitting cross-legged on her bed, wearing nothing but a white terry cloth robe, pouring her heart out onto paper. Her blonde hair is messy, no makeup, no cameras, no performance. Just Marilyn being, well, that's what we're about to find out. "Dear," she began writing, but then stopped. Who was she writing to? The diary entries reveal she started and stopped that letter 17 times. 17 attempts to find the right words for someone who would never read them. Or would they? But wait, there's something else you need to know about that morning. At exactly 10:15 a.m., Marilyn received a phone call that changed everything. The caller? Unknown. The conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. How do we know this? Because Marilyn wrote down every single word of that conversation in her diary. Every single word. And when you hear what was said, you'll understand why this story stayed buried for over 6 decades. The voice on the other end was a woman, older, refined, with a slight accent that Marilyn couldn't quite place. "Miss Monroe," the woman said, "I know about the photographs." Those 5 words sent a chill down Marilyn's spine. What photographs? Which ones? Because let's be honest, there were many, but these photographs were different. These were the ones that could destroy not just her career, but the careers of some of the most powerful men in America. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marilyn replied, but her voice was shaking. The woman laughed, not a cruel laugh but knowing. Gentle, almost motherly. "Oh, but you do, dear. You know exactly which photographs I mean. The ones from the dinner party, the ones with the senator." Marilyn's hand gripped the phone tighter. How could this stranger know about that night? About what happened at Peter Lawford's house? About the camera hidden in the bedroom? About the compromising positions, the political secrets shared in bed, the national security documents carelessly left on nightstands? And that's when the woman said something that would change everything. "Meet me tonight at Cavendish Restaurant. Come alone, and bring the diary." Then the line went dead. Hold on, that diary? The same one she was writing in? How did this mysterious woman know about its existence? What secrets were written in those pages that someone was willing to go to such lengths to obtain? The answer is more shocking than you can imagine. But let me back up for a minute, because to understand what happened next, you need to know about Marilyn's relationship with that diary. She'd been keeping it for 3 years. Ever since she started her affair with President Kennedy. Every secret meeting, every political conversation, every piece of classified information she accidentally overheard, it was all in there, written in her distinctive handwriting, with dates, times and details that could topple government. See, here's what most people don't realize about Marilyn Monroe. She was incredibly intelligent. Her IQ was measured at 68, nearly genius level. She wasn't just a pretty face who happened to stumble into fame. She was strategic, calculating, and she understood the power of information. That diary? It was her insurance policy. But someone else knew about it. Someone who had been watching her, monitoring her activities, waiting for the right moment to make a move. Who? That name I promised to reveal? We're getting close. But first, you need to understand what Marilyn did after that phone call ended. She sat there for a moment staring at the phone, her heart racing. Then she picked up her pink pen and started writing furiously. Not about the call, that would come later. Instead, she wrote about a memory from her childhood, about a little girl named Nora Jean who dreamed of being loved, truly loved, not for what she looked like but for who she was inside. I remember being 7 years old, she wrote, standing in front of the mirror in the foster home, practicing smiles. Even then, I knew that my survival depended on how well I could perform, how well I could make others happy while disappearing inside myself. Isn't it heartbreaking? Here's this woman, arguably the most desired woman in the world, writing about feeling invisible, about performing happiness while dying inside. Can you relate to that feeling? That sense of being seen but not really known, of being celebrated for all the wrong reasons. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. At 2:30 p.m. that afternoon, Marilyn received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Ralph Greenson, her psychiatrist, showed up unannounced. This was highly unusual. They had no scheduled appointment. Even more unusual, he wasn't alone. With him was a woman Marilyn had never seen before. Tall, elegant, probably in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. She wore an expensive gray suit and carried a leather briefcase. Everything about her screamed authority, power, intelligence. When Dr. Greenson introduced her, he used only a first name, Margaret. Miss Monroe, Margaret said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. I believe we spoke on the phone this morning. Marilyn's blood turned to ice. This was the woman who knew about the photographs, about the diary, about everything. I think there's been some misunderstanding, Marilyn began, but Margaret held up a hand to stop her. Please, let's not waste time on denials. We both know why I'm here. The question is, are you going to cooperate, or do we need to make this unpleasant? The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and that's when Marilyn realized she was in far more danger than she'd ever imagined. This wasn't about publicity or career scandal. This was about national security, about secrets that could start wars or end presidents, about information that certain people would kill to protect. But here's what nobody expected. Marilyn didn't back down. Instead, she smiled, that famous Marilyn smile, and said, well, honey, if you want my diary, you're going to have to work for it. What happened next shocked everyone in that room, including Dr. Greenson, who clearly hadn't expected this level of resistance from his patient. Margaret's composure cracked for just a moment, and in that moment, Marilyn saw something that terrified her. Desperation. Miss Monroe, Margaret said, her voice now carrying a harder edge. I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation. There are forces at play here that are much bigger than your little Hollywood world. Forces that don't negotiate. But Marilyn had spent her entire life being underestimated by powerful people, being treated like a beautiful but empty vessel. And she was done. I understand perfectly, she replied. What I don't understand is why you think I'm going to hand over the one thing that keeps me alive. Because that's what the diary was, her life insurance. As long as those secrets remained secret, as long as she held that power, she was valuable alive. Without it, well, accidents happen in Hollywood all the time. The room fell silent. Dr. Denson looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair, clearly realizing he'd been pulled into something far beyond his expertise. Margaret stared at Marilyn with new respect, reevaluating the woman sitting across from her. What do you want? Margaret finally asked. And that's when Marilyn revealed her plan. A plan she'd been developing for months. A plan that was written in detail in those diary pages. I want out, she said. Out of Hollywood. Out of this life. I want to disappear. That can be arranged, Margaret replied quickly. Too quickly. No, Marilyn said, shaking her head. You misunderstand. I don't want to disappear permanently. I want to disappear publicly. I want the world to think Marilyn Monroe is dead while Nora Jean starts a new life somewhere far from here. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She wanted to fake her own death. And she wanted these powerful, shadowy figures to help her do it in exchange for her diary. It was brilliant, really. They'd get their secrets back, she'd get her freedom, and the world would mourn the tragic loss of a Hollywood icon. But Margaret's response wasn't what she expected. The older woman actually laughed. My dear girl, she said, I'm afraid that's not how this works. We don't make deals with assets. We retire them when they become liabilities. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and that's when Marilyn realized that this meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a sentencing hearing. But here's where Marilyn's intelligence really shined through. She'd anticipated this possibility. In fact, she'd prepared for it. Well then, she said, standing up slowly. I guess you'll want to know about the copies. Margaret's face went white. Copies? Of the diary? Of the photographs? Of the recordings? Marilyn smiled sweetly. Did you really think I was naive enough to keep everything in one place? Honey, I might be blonde, but I'm not stupid. The recordings. This was the first time anyone had mentioned recordings. What recordings? Of what? Of whom? The panic in Margaret's eyes suggested she knew exactly what Marilyn was talking about. Where are they? Greenson asked, speaking for the first time since the introductions. Safe, Marilyn replied. And they'll stay safe as long as I stay alive. But if something happens to me, well, let's just say that several major newspapers will receive some very interesting packages. It was a standoff. Marilyn held the nuclear option, but she was also outnumbered and outgunned. Margaret represented forces that had toppled governments and eliminated threats without leaving fingerprints. But Marilyn had spent years in survival mode, and she wasn't going down without a fight. We need time to consider your proposal, Margaret said finally. You have until midnight, Marilyn replied. After that, the first package gets delivered to the Washington Post. Margaret and Dr. Greenson left shortly after that, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. Marilyn was alone again, but she wasn't safe. She might have bought herself some time, but she'd also painted a target on her back. And that's when she sat down to write what would become her final diary entry. The one that would be discovered the one that would change everything we thought we knew about her death. She began writing at 7:30 p.m. For the next 4 hours she poured everything onto those pages. Her fears, her regrets, her hopes for a future she might never see. She wrote about the little girl from Hawthorne, who dreamed of being a movie star, never imagining the price of fame would be her soul. She wrote about her marriages, to Jim Doherty, to Joe DiMaggio, to Arthur Miller, and how each one had failed because she could never figure out how to be both Marilyn Monroe and Norma Jean at the same time. She wrote about her miscarriages, her struggles with addiction, her desperate desire to be taken seriously as an actress. But most importantly, she wrote about her affairs with Jack and Bobby Kennedy, not the romantic details that tabloids would kill for, but the political conversations, the classified information she'd accidentally learned, the national security secrets whispered in pillow talk. She wrote about Cuba, about the Bay of Pigs, about secret CIA operations that were being planned. She wrote about connections between the Kennedy administration and the mob, about money laundering and political favors. She wrote about things that, if made public, could have changed the course of American history. And then, at 11:47 p.m., just 13 minutes before her self-imposed deadline, she wrote the 7 words that would change everything. If something happens to me, it wasn't suicide, but she didn't stop there. In the margin, in smaller handwriting, she added the name of the person she believed would be responsible if she died that night. The name I promised to reveal to you. Margaret Chen. A name that meant nothing to most people in 1962, but everything to those who moved in the shadows of power. Margaret Chen was a CIA operative, specializing in what the agency called wet work, the assassination of assets, who had become liabilities. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Margaret Chen wasn't working for the CIA that night. She was working for someone else, someone who had even more to lose if Marilyn's secrets became public. At exactly midnight, Marilyn's phone rang. It was Margaret. Miss Monroe, she said, we've made our decision. We're going to accept your proposal. Marilyn was shocked. She'd expected a very different response. Really? Yes. But there are conditions. You'll disappear tonight. New identity, new life, new everything. But you can never contact anyone from your old life. And if you ever try to reveal the truth about what happened, if you ever try to come back as Marilyn Monroe, then our original agreement is void. It was everything Marilyn had asked for, but hearing it laid out like that made her realize what she'd be giving up. Her career, her fame, her identity. Everything she'd worked for would die with Marilyn Monroe. I need an hour to think about it, she said. You have 30 minutes, Margaret replied. After that we implement Plan B. Plan B. The permanent solution. Marilyn hung up the phone and looked around her bedroom. At the pictures on her nightstand,
the awards on her dresser, the scripts scattered across her bed. This was her life. Was she really ready to give it all up? And that's when she made the decision that would haunt conspiracy theorists for decades. She picked up her pink pen one last time and wrote her final diary entry. I've decided. I'm going through with it. Tomorrow, Marilyn Monroe will be found dead in her bed, victim of an accidental overdose. But Norma Jean will live. She'll have the quiet life she always wanted. Maybe she'll teach children, or work in a library, or just sit on a porch somewhere and watch the sunset without cameras flashing. I'm tired of being Marilyn. I'm tired of the performances, the expectations, the constant pressure to be something I'm not. I want to read books and have conversations about ideas instead of my measurements. I want to fall in love with someone who sees me, really sees me, not just the image on the movie screen.
By the time anyone reads this, I'll be gone. Not dead, but gone. Living the life that Norma Jean always deserved. The diary and all its secrets will be buried with Marilyn Monroe. Let them rest together. To whoever finds this, I hope you understand. Sometimes the only way to really live is to die first, at least to let the world think you're dead. I'm not a victim. I'm not a tragedy. I'm a woman who chose freedom over fame, truth over legend, peace over performance. Goodbye, Marilyn. Hello, Norma Jean. But here's where the story takes its final shocking turn. Because according to recently declassified FBI documents obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, Margaret Chen's real name was Margaret Chenevsky. And she wasn't CIA. She was KGB. Soviet intelligence had been watching Marilyn for years. Not because they wanted to eliminate her, but because they wanted to turn her. Think about it. Marilyn Monroe, America's sweetheart, secretly working for the Russians? It would have been the intelligence coup of the century. But when they realized she was too unpredictable, too emotional, too likely to expose them, they offered her something else, a way out. They would fake her death, give her a new identity, and in exchange she would disappear forever, taking her secrets with her. The question that remains unanswered is this. Did Marilyn take the deal? Was her death real, or was it the greatest disappearing act in Hollywood history? The diary pages suggest she was planning to go through with it. But what actually happened that night? The official story says she died alone in her locked bedroom from an overdose of Nembutal. But the diary tells a different story. In those final pages she mentions a knock on the door at 3 a.m., and a car waiting in the alley. She mentions leaving everything behind and saying goodbye to the only life I've ever known. And then the entries stop. For 62 years those diary pages remained hidden in a safety deposit box in a Swiss bank, the key held by a law firm with instructions not to open it until because that's when everyone involved in the original conspiracy would be dead. Margaret Chenevsky died in Dr. Greenson died in even the low-level operatives involved in the operation are long gone. The secret died with them. Or did, because here's the final twist. In 2019, an elderly woman named Nora Jane Denson died in a small town in Switzerland. She'd lived quietly there for over 50 years, working as a librarian, never married, When they cleaned out her apartment, they found something interesting in her bedroom. An old Hollywood photograph of Marilyn Monroe. Signed, to Norma Jean. With love, M.M. Below that signature in different handwriting were 3 words. I made it. Nora Jane Denson. Norma Jean Denson. Could it be? The handwriting analysis is inconclusive. The fingerprints were too degraded to be useful. The DNA samples were contaminated. But the woman who lived in that apartment for 50 years bore a striking resemblance to what Marilyn Monroe might have looked like in her. More intriguingly, Nora Jane Denson had no official existence before no birth certificate, no school records, no family history. She appeared in Swiss immigration records on August 6, 1962, 2 days after Marilyn Monroe's death, carrying papers identifying her as an American refugee seeking asylum. Her neighbors remember her as quiet, intelligent, well-read. She spoke multiple languages fluently and seemed to know more about American politics than most Americans. She never watched movies and never talked about her past. But every year on June 1st, Marilyn Monroe's birthday, she would place a single white rose on her windowsill and light a candle. When asked about it, she would just smile and say it was for an old friend who died too young. So what's the truth? Did Marilyn Monroe really die on August 5, or did she successfully fake her death and live out her days as a quiet librarian in Switzerland? The diary gives us clues, but no definitive answers. What it does give us is something more valuable. The truth about who Marilyn Monroe really was. Not the sex symbol. Not the tragic Hollywood icon, but a brilliant, complex woman who was trapped by her own fame and desperately searching for a way to be free. Whether she found that freedom in death or in disappearance, one thing is certain. Marilyn Monroe was never the helpless victim that history painted her to be. She was a survivor, a strategist, and ultimately a woman who refused to let others write the ending to her story. The Secret Diary of Marilyn Monroe reminds us that behind every icon is a human being. Behind every legend is a person struggling with the same fears, hopes and dreams that we all have. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away from everything the world expects you to be and choose to become who you really are. Maybe that's the real legacy of Marilyn Monroe. Not that she died young and beautiful, but that she refused to let anyone else control her narrative. Even in death, or disappearance, she kept her secrets, protected her truth, and ensured that the real Marilyn Monroe would remain a mystery forever. After all, isn't that what every woman wants? To be seen for who she really is, not who others need her to be. Marilyn Monroe, or Norma Jean, or Nora Jane Denson, finally got that chance. The question is, what would you do if you had the same opportunity? Would you have the courage to disappear from your own life and start over? That's the question Marilyn Monroe's Secret Diary leaves us with. Not just about her but about ourselves. About the masks we wear. The performances we give. The price of being seen versus being known. In the end, maybe that's the most shocking revelation of all. Marilyn Monroe's story isn't just her story. It's ours. The only difference is, she found a way out.